Hey everyone out there in YouTube land, Dan here, aka the Comic Concierge, because the world needs another YouTube channel dedicated to the comics. I thought I would start my own. It's not my first foray into this. I've done stuff for Geekcast Radio, and you may be watching this at geekcastradio.com, but I wanted to kind of start my own channel because there's a lot of stuff on Geekcast Radio. This can just be dedicated strictly to comics and my thoughts and opinions on comics, and to be as familiar as possible. I'm going to start with a very familiar type of video, going down and counting down the comics that I read this week, from my least favorite to my favorite, and stealing ideas from sleepy readers. Countdown, as I often watch each week, and I'm taking that idea and kind of incorporating into that, and amongst other videos I hope to be doing for this channel moving forward. And I'm excited to get into it, so hope you enjoy some of my thoughts and opinions on these books. And I'll start with my least favorite book of the week, as I mentioned. And that goes to, kind of pains me to say, but goes to Chariot #1 from Upshot Comics, AWA, written by Brian and Edward Hill. And I'm going to be very consistent with a lot of other YouTubers and mispronounce names very horribly. And the artist is Priscilla Petrietis. I can barely say my own name correctly, so I do apologize for that. So I went into this with mixed expectations. Brian Edward Hill is a writer that I really look forward to reading his stuff. American Carnage from 2 years ago was my favorite series of the year. I really enjoyed his Killmonger series as well, and I also enjoyed his Batman Outsiders. However, AWA as a publisher is one thing that does not always click with me. I feel like a lot of their books have great concepts, but when it comes to character and story, they tend to fall short. It's not really there to make it a complete comic. And I won't say that's necessarily the issue with this issue, or the problem with this story. I think the biggest issue with this was that it kind of undercuts what makes it special, the major hook of this. And what this story centers on is a family, and it's a father and a mother who have split, but they have a son who is in the hospital and dealing with some medical issues. And to further complicate things a little more, their son the father has gotten in with the wrong people. He owns the wrong people for money, but he thinks that they actually might be the people that can help him out in this situation, because they need money for their kid, and maybe he can kill two birds with one stone, pay his debts, and find a way to save his kid. The issue is, it kind of sets itself up to be that kind of trope, right? That trope story of the guy who tries to get out of a life, but because of circumstances outside of their control, it's pulled back into it. However, that's kind of the red herring, and really the story is about this car. And we know it's about the car because you get this, I will say, effective and well done early big chase scene of dealing with this car, and then jump cuts to this family. So you're like, okay, eventually that car is going to be come back into play by the end of the story, and that's basically what's happening. I will say I will try to avoid major spoilers and not get anything away that you wouldn't really know from either just looking at the cover or just the concept. And I do realize that's kind of the majority of the story, but again, that is basically the premise of the book. And ultimately, I was just left not really being majorly affected by anything within the story. It all just seemed to be just introducing you into the idea. And first issues are extremely hard to do well, and it's like trying to write a TV pilot where everything that's important is established before the first commercial break. So I tend to be a little bit more lenient, but it's because of that where most first issues are often the worst issue of an entire series. And if that's the case for this, I think this could end up being a pretty good book. I do like the one bit in here where we do get a really strong character moment where the father and son are having a conversation, and the father mentions how common their story was, which I thought that's like in the Brian and Edward Hill I know, because often when it comes to characters, you're really trying to make them exceptional. These are exceptional people, that's why we have a story about them. But the strength of this story is how common it can be to be in that type of situation, and the avenues people have to go to try to solve it. So I thought that approach had me thinking, okay, there's going to be more here than your typical story, because that's the type of writer Hill is. And the art, I think, is overall pretty good. When it comes to the character designs, I just found when it comes to perspective and the general page layouts, they were pretty standard. Nothing super special going on, although, like I mentioned, that opening chase sequence was really strong. So if this book has a lot of chase sequences, it'll probably strike your fancies really well. I'm also not a big car guy, so ultimately it wasn't a bad issue. It's just nothing about it really stood out to me that said, hey, this is something you really, really want to read and moving forward. So I think maybe your miles may vary. I think if you may really enjoy it and find that what I promise is exactly what you want, especially if you're like a Knight Rider fan. Next up on my list, number 14, I think I got 15 books this week. Read the 15 books this week, is from IDW, and this Beast Wars Transformers number 2. So I missed the whole Transformers craze as a kid. I was into G.I. Joe, but Transformers was never a thing for me. But I did watch Beast Wars. I think mainly because it was a CGI show, one of the first CGI shows, and I really liked it. And I even watched the second series, which was Beast Machines, I believe. So when they were coming out with a comic, I thought, hey, let me go ahead and try to get that and see what it's like. I liked the first issue. The first issue was, setting the stage. It was like, the opening of the TV show credits where, now they're on Earth, but this isn't really Earth because, as you can see, they have like floating mountains. So this is taking a different avenue than the show. There's different characters, some new characters, some familiar faces well. As an issue, this is figuratively and literally just setting the stage. These characters are just getting a laying of the land. It is certainly taking its time, and that's kind of why it wasn't that much higher. I like the character interactions. The voices seem to be pretty strong. I do like the art. Right, drawing Transformers is not an easy thing to do, and when you have to draw Transformers and draw animals, that's got to be like an artist's worst nightmare. So I think the artist here has a tough task and handles it pretty well. It's a very cartoony style, but has a little bit more of a rough edge to it. And there's also this third party, which is completely different than the comics that's showing up, which I like. I like when it's different than the TV show when it's not trying to just copy what we know. So I'm not the biggest Transformers fan, comics fan in general. And this does have one of the issues I do find with Transformers comics is the world itself. It's very flat and not lived in. There's not a lot of detail when it comes to the backgrounds. Even this new world, Earth, you don't see a lot. It doesn't feel like an adventurous world that you want to explore. So that's another piece of it. Like the character designs are strong, but everything else is a little bit just bland and not much when it comes to the general backgrounds. And it feels like a world that is absent of life. And I kind of get that when it's Cybertron, but when it's this new planet, and I think that's part of the appeal, and it's something they really haven't leaned into that much this issue. So I'll probably keep with it. Like I said, I think the characters are there. It's just really slow moving at this moment in time, and I'm hoping that there's something here that will keep me going moving forward. So going from an issue that doesn't have much happening to an issue that has a lot happening. And this is again from IDW, and this is Star Wars High Republic number 2, Avengers, Star Wars High Republic Avengers number 2. So the Avengers line, typically for Star Wars, are more kid-oriented and more all ages. And I will say that is not really the case for this series. If you're someone who maybe avoided it because you thought, I don't want to read a book that's meant for 5-year-olds or 12-year-olds, I think this is written at the same age level as the other Star Wars books, really. Even the art design, often like the Avengers books have a really clean look. They're much more simplified, aping more of the animated show style. Not really the case here. My one issue with this is that there is almost too much. There's a lot happening, but at the same time, there's not much story going on. And I've actually gone all in on the High Republic. I have the novels behind me. I really enjoyed the first novel I'm reading right now. I read this one, Into the Dark. I've enjoyed this. This is much more. This is, I think, much more geared towards a younger audience than the comic is. But with this, if you have not read those books, I think you'd be completely lost with this, because it doesn't give you a lot of exactly who these people are, especially the Nihil, which are the big bad, and the High Republic are in this, and I know they're a huge threat because I've read the books. This doesn't necessarily really convey that all that much. We do get a familiar face with Yoda showing up, so that's fun, although he does dominate the book a little bit too much, and if this is meant to introduce new readers, introduce new characters, they do kind of take a backseat, unfortunately. And the art I did not love. I think it gets a little bit too busy at times, and then there's this one surprise face that is used so much that it became distracting. So that was my one deterrent. There's some good overall shots, but again, there's a lot of chaos here, and I can't necessarily understand what exactly is happening moment to moment. And that's the general problem I've had with these first two issues. I do think the third issue is probably going to be improvement because things are slowing down a bit, and now that the Nihil, or now that the conflict has switched to what this was, I think we'll get a little bit more geared towards who these characters are, which has always been the strength of Star Wars. So hopefully that's the case. I'm keeping with it because I'm all in on the High Adventures, High Republic stuff, but not one of the strongest pieces of that universe so far. Next on my list, one big franchise to another big franchise, is Batman number 106. I've been somewhat lukewarm on Tinian Run. I know a lot of people love it. I've enjoyed it for the most part. I think my biggest issue with it is that it falls into the being rather familiar, and one thing I hate about Batman stories is when he becomes a minor character in his own story, and I feel like that's the case with a lot of Tinian stuff so far. He's very reactionary force rather than a full-fledged character at times. However, I am excited to see what Tinian can do with Scarecrow. Jimenez's art too is phenomenal. That's the highlight of this book for sure. It's been a long time since we got this book, so I was somewhat surprised that there was not much happening, really. It was a lot of kind of setting the pieces, kind of showing how Gotham is still reeling from all the attacks that have happened, from Joker War to Bane taking over the city, and how that's feeding fear. And of course, Scarecrow's there to take advantage of it. So I do like how it is setting the pieces. I think showing that the stakes of the past main events are carrying over, and also setting the pieces with the magistrate to what happened in Future State. Although I think it's kind of weird that we went forward to Future State, and now we're going back to kind of see how that's set up. So, there's clearly a plan here, but I think that's always a weird way to read something, like reading a prequel of something that happened a month ago that itself wasn't already done. And there isn't really anything major that happens. There's like a big action sequence that feels like it's there because it's a Batman book, and there's some small character moments with like Batman and Duke that I did like, and Bruce Wayne and Duke, I guess. And I do like it when superhero books slow down and give you that. But it wasn't anything super special, like anything that really got into the characters to any depth, ultimately. So, it was somewhat of it was just there. It's one of those issues I feel like it's probably one of the least eventful books that Tini has done for Batman. But it wasn't necessarily anything I would say that was bad. It was a necessary piece of the puzzle, but maybe just considering it's been gone a while, I was hoping for something more major. But I'm excited to see what he does with Scarecrow, because I think he could really nail that. He's shown he can do horror really well, and Jimenez has a different flavor. His art's even seeming to like get the aesthetic of Neo Gotham already. So I don't know if that is another kind of connection to Future State as well. Another big franchise book, another new number one that came out this week, James Bond number 1. I got this because Dynamite's James Bond books are usually really good, and I think this continues that. This is written by Christoph Gage. Again, I'm going to get the artist wrong. Luca Casaleganda. Probably horrible. And colors by Heather Malone. So, I've enjoyed a lot of the James Bond books, like James Bond The Body. It was really good. Lucas, the artist, actually was on that as well. He's also was on Scout's Honor, that's currently going on, and last year Lost Soldiers, which was an Image book, which I really enjoyed. I think his art has an ability to show brutality and violence in a way that's not gratuitous, which is perfect for a James Bond book. And I am a huge James Bond fan. You can see that behind me with the Bond set and movies, and I understand he's a very problematic character. There's no doubt about that, and there's some stuff about him that does not age well. My wife is very keen on pointing that out many times anytime I try to watch the movies. But I think there's ways to use those problematic elements in today's setting, and this is certainly not necessarily tied to the movies. Maybe it will be, but this is certainly a huge reimagination of the Blofeld character, and I love the way they approached that character, and that it's more Kingpin than like Dr. Evil with the cat. He's much more formidable, and much of this book is just a conversation between him and Bond, and it was a great way of seeing Bond kind of be put in his place and have to be put on a mission maybe that he wasn't want to be on. He's very, very many steps behind Spectre in this case. So because of that, he's becoming an agent of Spectre. And is he evil? Does he want to do it? That's still kind of in the air. But I like this. I like this approach. I do like that we got some really good character beats. The voices here are really strong and different, and I like this. I like this direction. So, and the art's strong, and I've been really dying to see the new movie that keeps getting delayed. So if you like that and you want some more James Bond in your life as you wait for the film to come out, this is a good alternative until that happens. The next book, I was really struggling where to place it because it's exactly what you would expect it to be, which is good and bad, I guess, depending on your perspective. And that's probably the biggest book of the week, which is Berserker #1, maybe one of the biggest books of the year. Because, of course, it's tied to Keanu Reeves, that he had a gigantic Kickstarter. Has like 8 trillion variant covers, because that's the thing now, of course. And it probably will be a movie because it's literally starting Keanu Reeves. And much of this is that a gigantic action sequence. And they basically told Ron Garney, who does the art, you go have fun, and exactly what he did. There's a lot of brutality, there's a lot of violence, and it looks great. I do think the action is pretty solid, although I'll get to another book where I felt like that action was far superior to this in every way. So I guess when that's your biggest selling point, and I feel like I've read books that have better action sequences that are a little bit more interesting, it does fall short a little bit. There are some character beats. We do learn a little bit about the character by the end of the book, and there does seem to be something secrets behind, what's driving him. But it's fun. It was enjoyable. I think the people who got this are going to get exactly what they want for the most part. I'm a huge Matt Kent fan, and I'll talk about another Matt Kent book. And this doesn't necessarily feel like a Matt Kent book, but at the same time, he's a very versatile writer, so I think he's just writing to the story. I'm not saying it's mindless. I think there are trying to say some things with this, but I also feel like when you have a guy who is literally immortal, can't be hurt, or at least can't be killed, it gets to the point where it's like, okay, it can be a little bit repetitive. And to be sacrilegious, I'm not also the biggest fan of the John Wick movies. I mean, I think they're really well done and they look great, but I kind of get exhausted by them because there's just so much action, and that was kind of the case with this as well. There's just so much to it, I become numb to it, and to the point where there's like I need a little bit more. Which is just a lot of people get punched in the face and punched to death, and that's great for a while. But again, I think it's effective. It's doing exactly what it sets out to do. So objectively, I think it's probably a little bit higher, but subjectively, I didn't probably enjoy it as much as other people might. So I think your mileage may vary. If you went into this because you want to see a kick-ass Keanu Reeves book, you get exactly what you're going to get. If you're waiting for the trade, because I know that people got the Kickstarter, I think you're going to get a really well done and well executed story. Perhaps we'll see how the other issues go. Although, I think to me, eventually after a few issues, I would need something little bit more. And there is potential there because you have this character who has literally, potentially, up to an assortment amount of years that he's been alive that you can go back to. So at least there's a lot of story there you can kind of ape. So we'll see. Speaking of great art, and this was a week of great art. Another book that was fantastic to look at was A Feast for the Eyes, was Jonah #1 by Laura and Mike Allred, and that's the biggest reason I got this, because I love Mike Allred's art. Everything he's done, from Daredevil to Captain America to some Superman stuff to another book I'll talk about in a moment. And this is more of a YA book. The colors here are a little bit brighter. And I was excited because you don't get a lot of YA monthly titles. It's often, the YA market dominates graphic novels, but when it comes to monthly titles, not so much. But if there's one word to describe this story, I would say it's abrupt. It starts off and you get this really fun adventure, and you see these two sisters having a conversation, and then flash forward a year, and that one sister has gone missing, and we're off to find her. And I basically told you the entire issue, and that's, again, it's great to look at, but just everything kind of happened in an abrupt way. We don't know what happened or why, where the sister went. It does seem like in that year, the world has become a little bit more decayed. It's not nearly as bright, but also her sister didn't seem super distraught about not seeing her for over a year. So I don't know, but it felt like a zero issue, like a free comic book day issue, where like it's gonna get you excited because this is like a flavor of what's happening, but as a complete story, it's not quite there. Almost like this was meant for more of a graphic novel, and they just split it into pieces to kind of have it out in issues. So I'm gonna keep with it. Like I said, first issues are tough to write. It looks great. I like the little bit of the characters that we have, and I do want to support a monthly YA book, and when it's there, because there's not many out there. It's a book I can read with my kid compared to some other stuff that's out. Another Star Wars book. So big week for Star Wars. Star Wars: The High Republic #3. I think might be the best issue of the series so far, and this I think is a little bit more open to people who have not read the other novels. You're probably still going to get more out of it if you have, and I would highly recommend reading the High Republic stuff. It's been really good. The Charles novel, Soul novel, for example, it was highly enjoyable. And this is a lot of those characters that are in that are in this, and they're off on this planet trying to investigate kids that are missing, as well as a Jedi who's a twin Jedi has gone missing, and the other piece is that his twin, they kind of share the same psyche. So what the other person feels, he feels similar to those characters from G.I. Joe. And this is a much more slowed down story, so we're getting to see who these characters are, and it has one of my I think it's turning to be one of my favorite characters in all High Republic, this Kizik character, and he's dealing with a lot, and it's actually dealing with what seems to be like PTSD, because he fought in a major battle where he was wounded. He lost his arm, although it's growing back, and a lot of people that he was around lost their life. He was one of the few to survive, and that's something we really have never seen, I think, Star Wars tackle, or the Jedi tackle, and it's often dark side versus light side, and that's not the case here. So I'm enjoying that exploration, and there's also a major villain reveal, which I don't want to get into this, but again, no Sith. So if you're tired of the same type of Star Wars story, this is not that. It has that. It's a great world that's been fun to explore. These characters are really developing into something special, and it's nice knowing that, not reading a Star Wars book and not knowing at all what's going to happen because it's not tied to anything else. So, highly recommend. Well, I would say I definitely check this out if you're enjoying the High Republic at all. It's a good way to kind of gauge your interest. If you enjoy this, you're going to enjoy the other stuff for sure. Next up on the list is Firepower, talking about Chris Samney. Another fantastic issue, a fun issue. This is, again, a big action-oriented issue, and I talked about with Berserker. There was another book I felt had better action. It was this. It was literally a battle in the air. If you read the last issue, it dealt with people falling out of the plane. That was a cliffhanger, literally, and now it picks up from there. And a lot of this is that sequence of them fighting, and it was fantastic to look at. It was a joy. It even took some time to have like an emotional beat too, and then it got into some more of the story at the end. And I feel like that's kind of the formula for the Firepower books. It's like a big action sequence, something tied to the character's past, something family related, and then a cliffhanger. And that's been kind of the formula of these series, of each issue so far. This is the first time I've ever read a Robert Kirkman book in issue format, and I do think his stuff does read better in trade. But I've enjoyed every issue so far, and I keep it's a really quick read, but it's a fun read, and the colors are always fantastic as well. And I would say if you've not read the trade that started this off, so it started first with the trade and then went into issues, this final probably is not going to be nearly as effective or impact you nearly as much, because it is keying into that a lot. So. And it is a fun cliffhanger that is going to, I think, have major ramifications moving forward. So I do like how they have varying cliffhangers, from something that's more, an immediate threat to something that's more story-based. Another big #1 that came out this week, DC, as they're kind of reshaping their universe again, is Swamp Thing #1. From Ram V and Mike Perkins. I did enjoy their Future State. Swamp Thing was probably my favorite Future State book, and this I liked. It was a little like there's a lot here left unsaid, and I could see people being somewhat frustrated with this, because it is a little confusing. We're getting a new Swamp Thing. The reasoning why, how it's happening is not being said, but we do see this theme that is being that's being established of these characters kind of trying to find a new way. There you have two concurrent storylines: a body being found in the desert, people thinking it's tied to this old myth of a person going out in the desert trying to find their own, and then we have a new character who is from India, who's traveling back from being India. He lives in the United States now, and you see there's been some conflict with him and his family, and he's also having these dreams of that he's not really sure of. We don't know why. It's just bugging him, and so it's a very slow build, very decompressed, and there's a lot left unsaid, which I kind of like. I like that we're not getting things handed to us, and like we're seeing kind of the bits form, and it's not trying to ape other classic Swamp Thing books. It's trying to be its own thing. At the same time, I guess I was just hoping for a little bit more. Like there's like no foundation almost. It's being formed, and I have faith in this creative team, and it looks fantastic. I love his panels because like he often has like his with great colors, and like there's so much character on these characters. Like each character looks like a person who's lived a life. There's like no one looks the same. Everyone has a very distinct personality. You have like an idea of someone how someone acts and operates just by the way they look, not in the sense because they live, their emotions are on their face, basically, not necessarily who they are personality wise, but like where they are mentally. And there's a really strong atmosphere as well. But like I said, there's just a lot that is left unsaid, and there's a lot that's still kind of I have a lot of questions about, and they're questions I'm excited to see answered. And I did think I liked their future stuff staged a little bit more, but again, that was tying into stuff we already knew because it's Alec Holland. This is brand new. So if you never read a Swamp Thing book, I'd say might be a good time to jump on because it's not tied to anything else, and it's also good not seeing someone not just try to do what Alan Moore did. So comics are better when we have a Swamp Thing ongoing. That's 10 issues, but it could be picked up for more. So we'll see how it goes. I'm excited for sure. Next on my list is Nocturne #1, and I didn't know how much I was going to like this. I have not been loving Scott Snyder stuff for DC. The metal stuff, it's just not for me. It's not necessarily that it's bad. It's just like it went over my head. I felt like I wasn't in it. I was part of an inside joke. I didn't know. This though I was really impressed with this, and this was a really good example of how to build character, how to build the world through character. It takes place again in a dystopian future. I know there's a lot of dystopian futures, tons of them. But in this, the whole thing is the world has gone black. The sun's not dead because it's not the world's frozen. There's just no light. There's no stars. There's no moon. Why? We get hints of why that might be happening, or at least we have a potential answer or source for an answer by the end. But our central character is someone who travels people from place to place in these big tractor trailers. And the other thing is, not only is it all black, but if you are in the dark for over a certain period of time, you can become this creature. And now the world is kind of covered with these creatures, so it's very dangerous to go out without light. And it starts with this rather big action sequence as they're traveling through it. But before we get to that point, we saw her background. We saw that she's adopted. We saw that her family was just starting to get formed, and she also had some medical issues where she could not see. She was blind because of cataracts. She got that fixed, but then what happened. So a bit of irony there, and a lot of it is through her perspective. It's pretty much her story. So I like that, and I like the little bits too. It looks fantastic. Tony Daniel's art's great, and I love a lot of this how the art informs the world. We see how these characters all have like lights. They're LED lights all around them. You can it doesn't. We don't find out because it protects them. You can kind of just tell. And that's what I thought was really good about this. It didn't over-explain things when it came to the world. Most of the explanation was more geared towards who these people are, what their conflicts are. The rules were established without feeling like you're being piled on with exposition. It's one of the best things I think I've seen Scott Snyder do in some time. Like, I didn't love Undiscovered Country, but this I think has a lot of potential. So I know it's a huge Kickstarter as well. So, but if you got that, I think it's the same exact book, of course, but I think that one is a little bit bigger and has more back matter. Yeah, I highly recommend that. It's really good. Looking forward for that. Moving one of the better first issues. Not the best number one issue, but one of my favorites from this week. And going into this week, I did not think that was the case. What would be the case? Speaking of cases, Fear Case number 2. And again, speaking of Matt Kent as well. This is Matt Kent, Tyler Jenkins, and Hilary Jenkins. Also the creative team behind Black Badge, another series I really enjoyed. Also, and Grass Kings, although Hilary Jenkins didn't color for Grass Kings. The best way to describe this book of Fear Case, it's like if you took the briefcase from Pulp Fiction, Wallace's briefcase, and then gave it the powers from the Ring. If you get this case, potentially there's maybe it's a myth, maybe not. You have to give it to the person you hate the most. If you don't, it would go to the person you love the most, and something horrible might happen. And you have these Secret Service agents that are tracking it down to see does it really exist, because it's this legendary case that all rookies get for a year, and they have a year to solve it, and if they don't, they have to move on. And this issue, what I really liked about it is that we got some time with these characters, and one of my favorite conversations was them discussing, like, what would happen if you got the case? What would you do? And their answer wasn't necessarily important. It just helped you inform, like, their way of thinking and how they approach things. So if you like things like X-Files, you might really enjoy this. I can't show a lot of it because there were some really gruesome moments in this. And I'm also impressed with how different every story that Tyler Jenkins and Matt Kent have done. Like, this is nothing like Rackings. This is nothing like Black Badge. It's even Tyler Jenkins' art seems to be a little bit different for this as well. He's doing some more brutal sequences. It's a beautiful book. I think Hilary Jenkins' colors strengthens his art because it becomes much more focused and I think much more defined. And I think what this is benefiting from is that it's getting into the idea of obsession, because it's like you see these characters, they're so focused in on this case that now they're becoming somewhat paranoid themselves. It's consuming them, and you're wondering, like, we're seeing all these potential issues, and is this what's happening? Is it not? It seems like it most likely is, but they're always getting so close. They're always like 1 or 2 steps behind. So it's a fun chase where, and they're not looking for a person. They're looking at this like random object. So I've really enjoyed this. I think it's has some like a tone similar to like Silence of the Lambs, where it's crime based, but there's some horror into it as well. It just has a really unique flavor that make it somewhat very different than other books that came out this week. So highly recommend that. I've been saying that a lot, but ultimately I guess it's true. It was a good week for books. Another book I ended up liking a lot more than I anticipated was Demon Days. X-Men number 1. This is from Peach Momoko, who's been making a name for herself with a lot of cover work, and now we're seeing her do a book in the interiors as well. And if you're wondering where does this fit in the world of X-Men, it doesn't. It's completely its own thing. I think the best way to describe it, it's similar to 1602, where that took like the Renaissance, not the Renaissance, but that time period, and adjusted Marvel's universe to fit it. And this is doing something similar, but with more of a Japanese folktale. You have these gods, and humans are having this relationship that at first is well balanced, but then humans become greedy and start encroaching on their lands. So now fights are breaking out, and the gods are coming in, occasionally killing the humans. One of the gods is also Venom, for example. I just like how it incorporated parts of the Marvel mythos into this. It looks beautiful. Like I've seen a lot of cover artists who are great at doing that, but when it comes to storytelling, they're not as strong. Peach Momoko, I think, is great at both. Coloring here is fantastic. Really strong watercolors, and it centers on Psylocke, who's like this Ronin samurai, and she has a dog named Logan. So who also maybe can heal, maybe not. Is he more than a dog? Who knows? But I did like this approach. And this is a complete story. Like, this could just be a one-shot, and we never see nothing from it, and it would be fine. It's really beginning, middle, end. And like, it could be like a what if in a way. Like, what if X-Men was a Japanese folktale, and it would work really well. There's going to be future issues, though. I think most likely what we'll see is Psylocke kind of traveling to these different towns. She's kind of like an investigator, seeing what's happening, trying to solve a problem and getting rewarded for it. So I think obviously the biggest selling point, of course, is the art, and the art was really good. I think the only time that I had a problem with it was there were some bigger action sequences where the pacing of it was a little weird, and some of the bigger moments got lost because there was a lot happening. Like a character gets majorly injured, and I didn't even notice it at first because there was so much going on. Outside of that, though, I think it was relatively strong, and uh, it varied from like really strong, like almost animated, like with the characters really exaggerated and kind of funny, to a little bit more dark and mysterious with like the Venom character. So I think Kumi Shimomoko is probably going to be one of those creators that kind of has a really, really impressive career ahead of her. And if we get more stuff like this, I'm glad Marvel is like giving her the avenue just to do what she would like. And this isn't tied to anything else Marvel related. It's its own thing, and I love when they do that. So I think I would see people who don't like X-Men liking that more than X-Men fans, because it's not giving you anything you typically get with an X-Men tale, outside of just some of the character names. Next up on my list, a lot of new books this week, but also we get a book ending with The Plot, number 8. This is from Vault Comics, written by Tim Daniel and Michael Morrissey, and drawn by Jonathan Hickson. And I've been loving this book. It's been one of my favorite horror titles since its first debuted, and this brings it to an end. And I don't want to give it away because I don't give a lot away with this book, obviously, because it's the end. But I will just say it was a very satisfying and emotional conclusion to this. A lot of the story has been focusing on family and kind of those hidden secrets that people try to keep buried, and how often that just permeates throughout generations. And this kind of brought that to a head. One of the most impressive things about this book has been how it has handled time. There's been multiple timelines, and when that happens with a series, it can get really confusing and very convoluted quickly. This handles it really well. The coloring, I think, is a big reason why. The past sequences are often a little bit brighter. They have more of a present overtone, where when we get into the current time, and things are a little bit darker, they're drearier. Just to kind of let you know that you're really in more of a pressing time because bad things are happening. It has a really strong atmosphere. It reminds me a lot of like 70s horror in the way that it's not really about the scares. It's about placing you at your mind in a certain place where just everything feels off. And that's the constant with this. It's just like you feeling like there's something is wrong, and that's been going on since the first issue. But in here, I think we get to really cathartic ending where finally something right happens, and it corresponds with something that's really just a general pleasantry, but I thought it was just a really good way of kind of balancing both of those, past and present. So kudos. Endings are hard. I mean, I know I said a lot about number one issues being difficult, but endings are just as difficult, especially horror endings, because you can, like, how do you solve this problem? How do you make it scary? And this, I think, is not about the scares, like I mentioned, it's about the story, and it ended up being quite good. So highly recommend that. It should be out in trade, I would say, probably soon, if there's already a first volume out. And last but not least, my number one book of this week is another number one, which is rare for me. Rarely is a number one issue my favorite book of the week. And this was a week with a lot of big names, a lot of major titles. And this one isn't one of those. It kind of came out of, I wouldn't say nowhere, because I had some anticipation for this. But it's Dead Dog's Bite number 1 from Dark Horse Comics. This is written and drawn by Tyler Boss, who I know mostly from Four Kids Walk Into a Bank that he did with Matthew Rosenberg. That's why I picked this up. I love that book. I figured, that was really strong. Let me try this out. And I will say, similar to like how Matthew Rosenberg is really known for his strong dialogue, Tyler Boss is not that far off. And the one word that I kept, when I was reading this, that kept permeating is that this book just has so much personality to it. From this opening, that this random omniscience narrator comes out of the sewer and just starts talking, and it's kind of ludicrous and surreal, and that's kind of how the book is. Kind of, it's hard to explain, and I don't think I'm going to do it justice, but it's ultimately about this girl, and one of her friends has gone missing, and we're just following her along and seeing how she's dealing with life as the town is kind of reacting to this loss. And she seems somewhat like an outcast. I wouldn't say like, I kept thinking Juno, because like that's kind of like her character design. It just kind of reminded me of her, but she doesn't have that. She's more sardonic than snarky, and she clearly has maybe some things that are, she's has some walls up, but she's also not afraid to fight back. There's a sequence in this where people are bothering her, and she's like, "I'm gonna scare the hell out of them, even though it might get me in trouble." But I think what was impressive about this is that it took time. It wasn't so much focused on telling the plot. It just allowed you to be in this world, be with this character, and I was fascinated by it. And the art is like the storytelling in this art is great. You know, there's been a lot of books this week that are focused on action. This was on character. This was on story, and it just led to a phenomenal book. And I don't know if this was. I did get a little Gone Girl vibe, but not. It's not at all like that narratively. But I just one of my favorite sequences in this is the main character is sitting and talking with a police chief, and the information that they're giving is not necessarily important, but from their just the way they're talking to one another, you understand their relationship, and that's a really hard thing to do with dialogue, where I have an understanding of how these characters relate to one another immediately just through their back and forth and their attitudes to one another. There's like this, like you can tell the police chief is just like kind of tired of her, but will put up with her. Maybe has a little bit of respect for her, and there's this little bit of mutual respect. But they also can't stand one another, and I thought that was the strength of this book was just the communication of it. And I talked about also how it would take time, and there was also like a cinematic feel. For example, they go to this kind of lookout point, and it transitions to this random scene of this guy being extremely awkward with another girl that has nothing to do with the overall narrative. It just, I think, helps further the tone of the story and leads to a funny moment. It's something you would probably see in a movie as you transition scene to scene, which you don't typically get in a comic, but it just made it different. There was nothing, when I felt like I read a lot of books that were similar, that had ideas that maybe were things I've seen before, but done pretty well. This was unlike anything I've read in quite some time. I thought maybe it'd be something like Criminal. It's nothing like that. And if you're a lot of crime books try to do what Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips does, it's nothing akin to that. If you like Four Kids Walk in the Bank and you thought that was mainly Matthew Rosenberg, clearly not, because this has a lot of that same personality, a lot of that same ability to inform character through dialogue. I was majorly impressed by this. It went from a book that was like I was anticipating to like now I'm like I cannot wait for the next issue. So highly recommend. Again, to repeat a phrase I've used a lot this week, but if there's one book out this week, one new number one, it's not these huge books. I would if I was getting up Dead Dogs Bite number 1, I think you'll enjoy it, especially if you enjoy the crime genre. If you enjoy things like Shane Black's type of stuff, like Kiss King Bang Bang, that are just characters out to the wazoo. That was the case here. There was never a boring moment. So, highly recommend checking it out. And that's pretty much it for me for this week. I hope you appreciate this, just trying this out. I know I'm probably a little bit rusty, so apologize for the rambling. But just remember, comics are for everyone. The key is finding the right one. Until next time, enjoy your reading.